will COVID infection numbers likely develop over the coming months? What effect will the new vaccines have that target the Omicron variants? Welcome to this week's COVID-19 special. We'll also be travelling to Ghana, where agriculture has been hit hard by the pandemic. But first, we're off to Morocco. The Moroccan government started a comprehensive vaccination drive last year. Now, though, the project is losing momentum.
People standing in line for a COVID vaccination. This was the situation in January of 2021, when Morocco started its massive vaccination campaign. At the beginning of the pandemic, the North African country introduced strict measures so as not to overburden its health system. One of the first successful steps was acquiring the vaccine.
A lot of people took part in the campaign from the very beginning. Many have gotten their first, second, and even third shots. Today, we're doing a fourth shot as a booster. After its introduction, Morocco made the vaccine available to all of its citizens, as well as foreigners living in the country.
According to the official count, 80% of the population is now vaccinated. This camp in Casablanca was set up specifically to receive and distribute the COVID vaccine. Most of the doses came from the Chinese producer Sinopharm. Today, Morocco has around 12 million doses stockpiled. We met with Dr. Aviv Mouli Said, who coordinates the national vaccination campaign.
Whenever there's an illness for which there is no effective treatment, there's only one solution, and that's vaccination. There are no other solutions, and we've all seen, whether we agree with it or not, that life has started to return to normal because of the vaccine.
But interest is waning. Mobile vaccination centres were meant to make it easier to reach people, but the numbers tell a different story. Whereas 24 million people received a first dose, only 7 million got a third, and fewer than 40,000 have gotten a fourth shot. Vaccination centres are empty. Reports and rumours in the press and on the internet have weakened the population's trust in the vaccine. That's the case across all age groups. We talked to Fatah, who is 56 and wants to remain anonymous. He hasn't gotten vaccinated, and that bars him from many places.
There are even doctors that don't want to be vaccinated, and I'm convinced by them, because no one knows better than doctors do. You hear terrible things about the side effects. I have big problems if I need an official document and have to go to the authorities. They ask for my vaccination card, and I don't have one.
Issues surrounding vaccination status and the rights of individuals was hotly debated in Parliament. Many civil rights activists say the vaccination pass, introduced in October 2021, infringes on people's rights. Aziz Ghali is the president of the Moroccan Association for Human Rights and is unvaccinated. He says people like him encounter many problems.
As long as vaccination is voluntary, citizens should be able to enjoy their basic rights. For example, we accept that unvaccinated people shouldn't enter a nightclub or other entertainment venues, but that they're prevented from entering an administrative building or a courtroom because they don't have a vaccination pass, that's unacceptable. The government failed to make citizens understand that the vaccination was primarily for health reasons and not just administrative purposes.
The Moroccan government says the vaccination passport was introduced to keep the epidemiological situation under control, to avoid a new wave, and by doing so, to recover economically. The head of the vaccination campaign is hoping that people will use their common sense.
When vaccination started, there were two groups facing off, those in favor of the vaccine and those against it. I think that's normal. We may be a little impatient. We have to listen to the others and try to convince them scientifically.
The The government hopes it can convince more people to get their shots, and it has a large supply ready to be used.
Vaccination is still the best way to get the pandemic under control. Health organisations have now begun to approve the second generation of mRNA vaccines, which is specifically tailored to battle the new Omicron variants. We spoke to Israeli virologist Jonathan Gershoni. We wanted to know if the new vaccines are really necessary and how they work. When SARS-CoV-2 infects a cell, it co-opts its systems and they start making coronavirus proteins instead. The pathogen's genome acts like a precise instruction manual for making more virus. So if something changes in that manual, if the directions mutate, it can cause changes in the virus components that are churned out. In the Omicron variant, one protein structure in particular has changed pretty dramatically compared to earlier versions of the virus, the spike that dots its surface.
The spike protein is that protein on the surface of the virus, which is exposed, and its role is to interact with the target cell the virus will infect. The spike binds to a corresponding protein on the cell which it's infecting. So long as the spike can bind to the receptor, to ACE2, that is what is going to mediate efficient infection.
To help fight off COVID-19, vaccines induce defensive measures in the body. Among them are the production of protective antibodies that can recognise and latch onto the surface of the coronavirus, especially its spike protein. That can stop the virus from docking onto cells to infect them and flag it up for destruction by other immune system defenders. But if the structure of the spike protein changes due to mutation, it can have consequences. The immune system might no longer quickly recognise the invader.
Omicron has, over time, adapted to become all the more efficient for infecting human cells. There are a number of parameters and characteristics that make it a really difficult virus to deal with. One of which is because it has changed some of its surface structure by a mutation, and the spike has a number of changes. It is less efficiently recognized by the pre-existing immunity, either through vaccination or recovery.
Some of the new COVID-19 vaccines use what's called messenger RNA or mRNA to prime or strengthen the body's immune response. The vaccines contain a short stretch of precise genetic information that causes cells to start producing coronavirus spike protein. Not entire viruses, as the cells would if they were infected by SARS-CoV-2. It's a novel approach.
RNA vaccines is a shift in concept. If you will, they are software vaccines. They are providing the genetic information, the blueprint, in order to instruct our body. These cells pick up the RNA and express the spike protein. So ultimately, they are generating the same protein that the traditional vaccine would use.
Changes to the spike protein could help the variant evade existing immunity to some extent. One reason why even people who've received first-generation vaccines, including messenger RNA vaccines, can still catch COVID-19. Even in them, Omicron's altered spike protein likely helps provide it with some camouflage at first. If the immune system doesn't react fast enough to stop the rapidly replicating virus entirely, it can contribute to a breakthrough infection. But there's still a lot to learn.
If we understand the mechanisms of the virus on the one hand and the inadequacies of natural immunity, we might be able to come up with solutions that will outwit corona and provide and stimulate more effective defenses such that we won't have to suffer from recurrent infection.
mRNA vaccine technology has a potentially game-changing advantage over other platforms. Rewriting the code is a pretty fast and straightforward process, and changing it changes the vaccine's associated spike protein. So why have omicron-specific vaccines taken so long to arrive?
This has a lot to do with two factors. Factor one, we're not sure that better adapting and refining the vaccine is genuinely going to afford a marked improvement in protecting against future infections. And then, of course, at the level of the manufacturer, decisions have to be made. When do we bite the bullet and actually now produce a new vaccine?
Experts hope messenger RNA vaccine technology will help us keep pace with new variants of SARS-CoV-2 as the virus continues to evolve. Many people around the world are still not vaccinated against COVID-19, and yet millions of expired vaccine doses end up being thrown away. In some countries, up to 30% of the vaccine doses ordered never get used. DW reporter Hang Xuan Li talked to health economist Michael Stolper about this problem and what can be done to solve it.
Michael Stolper, why is it that many wealthy countries order so many vaccine doses that some of them end up going to waste?
When the pandemic emerged in 2020, there were, of course, no vaccines. They first had to be developed, and they were in clinical studies for months. But the governments in high-income countries wanted to pre-order. And back then, they didn't know which vaccine candidates would be successful in clinical trials, which ones would be approved, and which would be really effective in fighting the virus. To minimize the risk of betting on the wrong vaccine, they instead ordered large quantities of several different vaccines. That way, if one didn't work out, they'd still have enough doses from another developer whose vaccine successfully made it through the trial phase.
But now we know a lot more about the vaccines, so why can't governments just order less?
Politicians tend to take a wait-and-see approach. And they're still risk-averse today. And under no circumstances do they want to face accusations in the fall or winter that they've ordered too little. So governments would rather order more than they need. And it's still the case today that some of the vaccines being adapted for the Omicron variant are still in clinical trials and need to be tested. There, too, we don't know how reliably manufacturers will be able to deliver those shots in fall and winter. So here again, governments would rather order more than be accused of ordering too little.
Why can't countries just donate the surplus doses, for example, to COVAX, the initiative that's supposed to be ensuring fair global distribution?
Vaccines are being donated mainly via COVAX, but it's also happening bilaterally between individual countries. But often it's far too late. The vaccines are only cleared for donation when they're shortly before their use-by date. Countries getting doses via COVAX may have been dealing with the big logistical hurdles and may not have always managed to use the doses on time. Local infrastructure is sometimes the issue, but you also need the technical expertise to organize the vaccine rollout. And that's what's missing in many countries.
But you've had an idea that could help improve things. It involves vaccination rewards in wealthy countries. Could you explain?
Vaccine waste and the destruction of doses happens because the doses have a limited shelf life. And when you also have a limited time window to actually administer the doses after they've been delivered so that they don't expire, then you need to create targeted incentives to ensure a high vaccination rate. One solution is a financial vaccination reward that could be paid out to people on a first-come, first-served basis. For example, the premium people receive could be anywhere from 100 to 500 euros for getting the complete triple vaccination.
für eine vollständige Impfung, also mindestens dreifach.
That would help drive up vaccination rates and also reach people in Germany and other high-income countries that have not yet been vaccinated.
Hocheinkommensländer nicht haben impfen lassen.
Thank you.
COVID infection rates in Ghana are not a concern right now, but the economic impact of the pandemic is still being felt. In particular, Ghana's agricultural sector and its women farmers have large hurdles to overcome.
Priscilla Adum left her corporate job to go into commercial farming in 2019, months before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before COVID, she was able to cultivate much of her 36 acres of farmland, growing all kinds of crops like onions, okra, tomatoes, and manioc. But her income has dwindled since COVID. She's unable to access extra funding to acquire heavy equipment and labor to cultivate more of her farmland.
So everything has more than 100% doubled. So if I was using, let's say, 20,000 cedis for my onions, this time round, I need more than 50,000 cedis for the onion. So then, I mean, there will not be any logical reason or good economic reason for me to do on a bigger scale. Unless, of course, I get the funds. If I get the funds, why not? I really want to do more.
Adum's woes are even bigger. She has struggled recently to access good seeds, fertilizers, and agrochemicals for her farm. At this shop, her usual fertilizers and chemicals are in short supply. Adum is worried about her production this year.
What the fertilizers were doing was that it was just complementing the manures that we were using. We always use them. So just a complement so that things can be, I mean, the crops can grow faster. Yes. So, I mean, it has been challenging. Sometimes you can't get it at all. What do? You just pray that what you are doing already would work.
Female farmers make up nearly half of Ghana's crop producers, but lack of land ownership and limited access to markets and means of finance and production remain major challenges. But farmers like Berikisu Tay are benefiting from Adum's advancement of their concerns and her experience in introducing new farming methods.
We have benefited a lot from her training. It has helped us to apply the necessary fertilizer for our crops and use chemicals to protect them. She has been very supportive.
With COVID still having an impact, Ghana now has a digital platform to help farmers reach consumers directly with the aim of improving revenue and reducing post-harvest losses.
Just like most of these e-commerce websites, we have a mobile version and then a web version, and the idea is that farmers can directly reach markets, reach consumers, and this will cut post-harvest losses.
Adum has joined other farmers to launch a vegetable farmers association aimed at reviving the sector in a post-COVID-19 era. She hopes to inspire other women to take to the fields. Back home though, Adum isn't giving up. She's even growing all kinds of crops in sacks in the hope that her hard work will bring a brighter moment in the years to come.
Do you have a question about the coronavirus? Our science correspondent Derek Williams gives you the latest research and analysis. Send Derek an email by writing to covidproducer@dw.com. This week, he's answering a question from Sandra. After having COVID-19, how long should I wait to get vaccinated in order to boost my immunity?
This sounds like a straightforward question, but it really turned into kind of a nightmare to research. That's because with 4 or sometimes even more shots being recommended for some people by some healthcare authorities, there are now just a lot of different possible combinations of vaccination and infection. If you already had the full 3-shot course, for instance, do you wait just as long to get a second booster after a breakthrough infection as someone who got COVID-19 who was unvaccinated beforehand? Complications aside, though, the basic message is that if you're eligible for vaccines, you should get them, whether you've been infected with the disease or not. I'll get to the specific advice from different healthcare authorities in a minute, but first, I have to mention a factor that most experts agree on, which is that people who have been both vaccinated against the coronavirus and been infected with it, in whatever sequence, they generally exhibit high levels of immune protection. The 1-2 punch of vaccine plus infection, it's called hybrid immunity. And studies have shown that it seems to be more durable and more potent than either vaccination or infection alone. Which is why, for example, Germany's Standing Commission on Vaccination recommends a booster for eligible groups at least 3 months after infection. But it also says it can happen as early as 4 weeks after COVID-19 symptoms have passed. In Britain, where the Committee on Vaccination has often forged its own path throughout the pandemic, the recommendation is that eligible adults wait to get a vaccine for at least 4 weeks after infection, while kids in general should wait for 12. The Australian authorities say everyone who's eligible, both children and adults, should wait for 3 months. In the US, the CDC is pretty canny in the language that it chooses. Its website says that eligible people may consider delaying their vaccine by 3 months from when symptoms started, which sounds like less of a formal recommendation and more of a gentle suggestion, if you ask me. But one way or the other, pretty much all of those healthcare authorities seem to agree that if you were eligible to be vaccinated and then you caught COVID-19 and then recovered from it, you should definitely get a vaccine to kick in hybrid immunity after 3 months or so.
Misinformation has been rampant throughout the pandemic, and our next report shows how it's affected thousands of dogs in Colombia. After rumours spread that dogs could transmit the coronavirus, many pets were abandoned by their owners. Now, some of those strays are finding new homes.
Paco has got a new sweater, something he only could have wished for when he was still living on the street. But now he has a new owner.
It was love at first sight. When I saw him, I thought, he's so beautiful. But he also seemed incredibly old. I'm pretty sure he was abandoned.
Paco was probably left on the street by his previous owner at the beginning of the pandemic. Animal rights activist Andrea Galindo was the one who found him. During the lockdown, rumors were circulating that posed a threat to every dog in Bogotá.
It was horrible. People thought that dogs were spreading COVID. People just abandoned them, no matter how long they'd had the dogs. 2, 5, even 7 years. It was just merciless and terribly hard on the animals. They weren't used to surviving on the streets. And suddenly they were alone.
For over 2 years, volunteers have been working to care for the strays. They collect food and try to provide veterinary care. But there are just too many dogs.
Yes, we receive donations and people help us. There is a lot of solidarity. But people have to be able to afford it. There's a lot of social inequality in our country. And that means we can't take care of all the animals.
Some of the dogs are lucky and find a new home. The son of Paco's owner is really happy about having a new family member. And Paco? Clearly, he's pretty happy too.
There are too many stray dogs roaming around, but we can improve their lives.
For animal welfare activist Andrea Galindo, Paco's new life is validation enough for her work. She has lost count of how many dogs she's helped, and every animal she finds has a place in her heart.
It's hugely gratifying. I always tell myself that's one less animal that's suffering.
There are still over 60,000 stray dogs in Bogota, each one also hoping to find a forever home.
And that's all for this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time.